Studio Gainax, yeah, the studio that brought us classics like Neon Genesis Evangelion, Gurren Lagann, probably has the most anxious origin story in the history of the anime industry. What started out as 5 friends chasing their dreams turned out to be the first step into a decade-long struggle against bankruptcy, crippling depression, internal power struggles, ichi game productions, tax evasion, and a multitude of other problems that I was quite shocked to find in the studio's history books. It's not until 1995 when they released an anime so legendary that was sure to be relevant decades into its future that their luck started to turn around. But before it, there was nothing but chaos. The story starts out in 1981 when 2 young university lads, Yasuhiro Takeda and Toshio Okada, apply to host the Japan Sci-Fi Convention. The convention occurred annually, each year in a different city. And for that particular year, thanks to Takeda and Okada's application, which was miraculously approved, the Sci-Fi Convention was going to be held in Osaka. Now, the Sci-Fi Convention had this thing they did where they would name the convention according to the city that would be hosting it. The kanji used to spell Osaka also spelled daikon, a kind of Japanese radish, and so they had the bright idea to call the event Daikon 3. 3 because that was the 3rd sci-fi convention held in Osaka. Shortly after their approval to host Daikon, Takeda and Okada decided that they needed to make an anime short about everything they loved in science fiction and pop culture. Star Wars, Star Trek, Gundam, Godzilla, Ultraman, and some obscure Japanese titles I've never heard of. They wanted it all in there. Realizing the breadth of the work ahead of them and the technical aspects they need help with, they decided to recruit 3 other members to help with the project. Hideaki Anno, Takumi Akai, and Hiroyuki Yamaga. The 5 of them went to work on the Daikon anime short in a small room attached to a factory owned by Okada's family. They were in for the wildest ride of their lives, but in that moment, while they worked on that Daikon 3 anime short, all that mattered was the project. They had a tight budget, but they put everything into the short despite of it, and after weeks of planning and animating, they'd finally done it. They'd made the very first anime. They were justifiably nervous about its quality and how it would be received, but they had nothing to lose. And so they played it as an introduction to the convention, this 5-minute 26-second anime that they put together with vinyl sheets and no budget, but with all the passion they could muster. From a technical standpoint, it was amateurish, but it had a hint of something exceptional. The short had their spirit, their deep need to create, and their bottomless love for pop culture and anime. Somehow, that was enough to make their Daikon 3 anime into an absolute hit that was really the highlight of the convention. This moment, this triumph, is really what made them. The Daikon 3 anime was the inception of everything they were about to go through, both the good and the horrifying, but they didn't see it for what it was. They were, after all, just 5 dudes making anime and hoping for something magical to happen. They started calling themselves Daikon Films and kept working together even after the convention was all wrapped up, evolving their skill, testing their boundaries, until 2 years later, in 1983, when the Japan Sci-Fi Convention returned to Osaka for Daikon 4. The group naturally went to work on another anime short, this time bringing to the table direction and experience. And what they came up with this time around was nothing short of extraordinary. Their Daikon 4 anime was polished and technically complex, a massive improvement from their first. So much of an improvement that their short was indistinguishable from what the anime industry was cooking up at the time. Daikon Films was officially famous. Both of their anime shorts combined created enough of a buzz to make them a distinguished bunch, but unfortunately their fame ended up being bottlenecked due to some copyright issues. The bunny suit, along with the Electric Light Orchestra song featured in the Daikon 4 anime, rendered their work ineligible for mass distribution, meaning no widespread home video releases. But still, they had lit enough of a fire to get them started on their next phase. The group got a big offer from Bandai to animate an anime film, Royal Space Force, an offer that came along with an 800 million yen budget, which is about $12 million today, an opportunity from the gods themselves. A nerve-wracking endeavor for the group, yes, but they were, at the time, bright-eyed and ambitious. They took the offer, dropped the name Daikon Films and picked up the name Gainax, moved out to Tokyo, and rented an office where they would spend the next 2 years working on the film. What they had in their hands by the end of it was their magnum opus. The film was a philosophical masterpiece, but despite all the good that is this film, it just didn't connect with its audience, and so it unfortunately failed commercially. But they didn't let that get them down. For a year, they hunkered down and went to work on their next project. At the time, mecha space adventures were all the rage, and Gainax had just the story. Gunbuster. a 6-episode series that was pretty remarkable for its time. Everything from its pacing to the animation just felt fresh and unique. It premiered in 1988 to instant success, but this time not just critically, but commercially as well. They were even invited to the Japan Sci-Fi Convention for an award. The very convention that brought them together and essentially made them acknowledge their ability once again in the best way it could. This was, without a doubt, the biggest moment of their lives, but they didn't stop to celebrate. Instead, they used the momentum from Gunbuster to broker a deal with Toho Animation, an adventure anime about a girl saving the world with her friends. This anime was called Nadia, Secret of Blue Water. The anime was originally pitched a decade prior to Hayao Miyazaki, but it didn't end up happening because Toho couldn't find a broadcaster interested in the idea. But things were going to be different this time. Toho had a refined pitch and a popular rising studio. It wasn't long before they signed a broadcasting contract with Nippon Hoso Kyokai, or NHK, for a 39-episode season. Gainax was on its way to superstardom. Oddly enough, however, this is where everything started going wrong for Gainax. Amidst all their newfound success, they harbored an internal power struggle. The producer, Hiroshi Inoue, thought it would be best if he were in charge of handling the firm. He, after all, had the most experience out of everyone in the studio. In an attempt to put his foot down on the matter, he scheduled a meeting with NHK to discuss the budget for their upcoming anime series, Nadia. The meeting was of course not communicated to the Gainax co-presidents Okada and Takashi, or to most of the staff for that matter, and Inoue, being absolutely out of control at this point, went as far as to begin production without their knowledge or involvement. By the time Okada and Takashi caught wind of what was going on, what Inoue had started could not be stopped. Deals were made, papers were signed, and a tremendous amount of work had already been put into what was going to be the anime. But be that as it may, Okada and Takashi weren't having it. They arranged a meeting with NHK. Coming along with them was an ultimatum that they were left with no choice but to give to what was, and still is, the biggest broadcasting station in Japan. Upsetting the NHK would have been career suicide, but Okada and Takashi were prepared for any eventuality. They demanded Hiroshi Inoue be removed from any further involvement in the project, else they back out of it altogether. The NHK saw no reason to dispute their grievance. With Inoue officially out of the project, Okada and Takashi promptly fired him from the company. But that didn't make their problems go away. The NHK had approved a contractual proposal personally written by Inoue that grossly underestimated Nadia's budget. This project was certainly going to bankrupt Gainax, but they didn't have a choice but to go ahead and resume its production. Hideaki Anno was assigned director, and production went on. Nadia was a huge success, but it came at the cost of Anno's mental health. You see, until then, Anno had only worked on OVAs that typically ran for less than 10 episodes. He didn't have the experience to direct the massive undertaking that was Nadia. In a 1995 interview, Okada described the experience of making Nadia as hellish and chaotic. With an inexperienced staff and director and the company bleeding money, it was no wonder it broke Hideaki Anno in spite of the anime success. But what was especially weird about the whole thing was that they had nothing to show for it in the end. Due to the deal Inoue made, they didn't get any royalties from Nadia. And not only that, the company had lost 80 million yen due to production costs, which is equivalent to about $1.2 million today. They were officially broke, right on the edge of bankruptcy. They couldn't even afford to pay their staff, let alone produce an anime. Everybody started quitting. Their once sprawling office became a ghost town. Okada, having had enough, decided to quit and leave the anime industry behind. He even suggested shutting down Gainax, but Takashi, through no small effort, convinced Okada to stay because, in spite of everything that had happened to them, he still believed in what they were trying to accomplish. But with their financial problems and their consequent inability to produce anime, they had no choice but to take a detour into the video game industry, where they stayed stuck producing Ichi video games for 4 years. During this time, they begged Hideaki Anno to give directing another shot. Part of the reason the studio stayed afloat was because everyone felt Anno deserved another chance at directing an anime series. Eventually, Okada and Takashi's feelings got through to Anno, and he agreed to work on another show. Half a decade of making Ichi video games had given the studio just enough money to produce a single anime. But if their next project failed, Gainax would have been forced to turn off the lights for good. Anno went to work storyboarding. He was still beaten, broken, and burnt out, but he chose to channel those feelings into a story he was writing. His depression gave birth to this dystopian reality, this hellscape of traumatized kids going off to fight a war in giant mech suits. What he wrote and ended up directing was Neon Genesis Evangelion, the anime that would pull Studio Gainax out of their worst years. Ava's reception was the stuff of dreams. The studio had essentially made a leap from the pits of bankruptcy, debt, and crippling depression right into hundreds of millions in sales. They controlled the merchandising and doubled down on Ava by producing films that went as far as to surpass the original show both critically and commercially. But even then, when everything was falling into place just as they wanted, trouble came knocking. The Tokyo Regional Taxation Bureau suspected the company of tax evasion and ordered a tax audit be conducted. This audit revealed a 1.56 billion yen concealment by Gainax. Due to all the financial difficulties the studio had been through in the past, Takeda and the company tax accountant Yoshikatsu Iwasaki thought it best to keep the money in safety deposit boxes for Gainax's future projects. On July 13, 1999, both Takeda and Iwasaki were arrested and later on jailed for accounting fraud. This, however, didn't fling the company back to economic purgatory. Ava was still the gift that kept on giving, and Gainax endured through the arrest of their president and tax accountant. The 21st century was good to Gainax. They created FLCL, which was a massive hit, made a sequel to Gunbuster, which was well received, and then they did it again. In 2007, they premiered Gurren Lagann, an anime original so great that the entire world noticed it, a thing that was uncommon for the time. Besides Naruto and other shonen shows of that sort, anime was pretty niche outside of Japan, but Gurren Lagann managed to break through, and with this success came a ginormous payday. It would certainly appear that Gainax's worst days were behind them, but ironically, the company was about to be dealt a blow so great that it left the studio practically dead. In 2006, Hideaki Anno left Gainax to form Studio Kara, which years later, due to a royalties dispute over Neon Genesis, sued Gainax for 100 million yen. But really, the final nail in the coffin was dealt in 2010 when Gainax lost its key staff members who, like Anno, split off to create a studio of their own, Studio Trigger. Gainax was left bare with none of its prime talent. Trigger, on the other hand, went on to produce some of the most iconic anime of all time, from Kill la Kill to CD Projekt Red's Cyberpunk Edgerunners. They have, over the years, proved to be a formidable force in the anime industry, and as far as the anime community is concerned, Trigger is Gainax's spiritual successor. Gainax, although out of the game, left behind an immutable legacy and a story immortal. I mean, who could forget Daikon? Who could forget Neon Genesis Evangelion, Fully Cooley, and Gurren Lagann? How could anyone possibly forget what is the most iconic fight for fame and success that the anime industry has ever known? No one.